Welcome to a special episode today to celebrate the first anniversary of Stories from Palestine podcast. And in this episode, I want to share with you how the podcast came into being. Who am I, the host of the podcast, and how did I get to live in Palestine? Some statistics to give you an insight of who is listening to the podcast. And I asked listeners to send reviews and messages for this special episode. And I have been overwhelmed with the nice response. This podcast would not be so successful without you as listeners. So first of all, I want to start with thanking you for tuning in and sharing the podcast with your friends, for following the Facebook and Instagram page, the YouTube channel, the website, and especially I want to thank those of you who have in the past donated towards the costs of the podcast on the Ko-fi platform. After 1 year of Stories from Palestine, I feel that this is not just a podcast. It is a community, and I am very grateful for that. So how did it all start? Well, I definitely have to include the COVID pandemic into the story. And of course, the fact that I was studying the tour guide program at the Bible College in Bethlehem. But let's go back a little bit in time, even more. It all started in 2006 when I first visited Palestine. I had visited before to see some friends that I met in Holland, and they were Israelis from the Israeli Anarchists Against the Wall. And I had been in Tel Aviv, I had been in Jerusalem and in some other places, but I hadn't crossed into the West Bank to meet with Palestinians. And in 2006, I joined an olive harvest program. It was run by the local YMCA and the YWCA. It's called the Joint Advocacy Initiative of the YMCA and the YWCA of Palestine. They are very good in names for NGOs that are very long. And they organized a trip in which you could not only support the Palestinians with the harvest and be a protective presence, but also we did a lot of excursions and we saw a lot of the country and we ate traditional Palestinian food. We stayed with Palestinian families, and that really made a big impression on me. I think many people who have been to Palestine, even though they don't have any Palestinian roots, they understand this feeling of feeling so welcomed, the hospitality of Palestinians, but also to be completely overwhelmed with all the injustice and what does it really mean to live under a military occupation and to see colonization in progress day by day. And so the mixture of that made me realize that I wanted to spend more time to understand that better. And I volunteered for about a year with different organizations in the Bethlehem area. And I lived mainly in a place called Beit Sahur, which is close to Bethlehem and known to be the place of the shepherd's field. And I mentioned that a couple of episodes ago in the episode about the milk grotto. In 2008, I got a job with the Dutch support group of the Olive Tree Campaign. And that was mainly advocacy work, bringing Dutch people to visit Palestine and bringing Palestinians to come to Holland on speaking tours, to speak at universities and other public events. And in one of my visits after that, in 2011, I met my husband, Tariq. And we got engaged and we married in 2013. And pretty soon after that, which you know if you heard the episode about the milk grotto miracle 2 episodes ago, I became pregnant with our first daughter, Louisa. And then we also had our son, Hadi. But let me go back a little bit to our wedding, because we got married in Palestine and we had about 750 people at our wedding. And I guess I knew maybe about 50 of them because they were friends and people that came from Holland to visit me for the wedding. But all the other family members I had never seen before. I've come to know quite a few of them by now, but there were still people at the wedding that I have no idea who they were. And it was a traditional Palestinian wedding, but not so traditional. So it wasn't a separated wedding for sure. We were mixed. That means men and women together, which is not always the case. Depends really on the family, but my family-in-law is not conservative at all. They are not even really religious. They are traditional in some sense, but more like following Palestinian heritage traditions and social traditions. So we danced all the night. We had a fantastic party. I even managed to do a surprise Zumba act because I'm also a Zumba teacher. And so we surprised the audience with a Zumba flash mob kind of thing. Then it was not that easy to get the paperwork done since my husband is from Jerusalem and I had to go through the Israeli system. I had to convert into Islam because there's no civil marriage. So we had to do that, not because of my husband's ideas or religion, or even because in Islam it is not obliged for a Muslim man to marry a Christian woman that she would convert, but because of the Israeli laws and because of the paperwork mainly that we had to do after that for me to get residency, we went to the Islamic court in Jerusalem and I stated the proclamation of faith and had my paperwork done. And then we had the sheikh who came to our house and he married us on paper. And then after that, we had the party. And then we went to Holland and we even had a Dutch wedding party with my friends and family here in a Dutch windmill. That's when we got pregnant, or I actually was already pregnant by that time because it took me only 6 weeks. And so I was pregnant for 3 or 4 months when we did that party in the windmill and I announced it to my family there. And after that, we went back and we stayed and lived in Beit Zafafa. We opened Singer Cafe in Beit Sahur and later also my husband opened a bar called Al Jisr Bar. And that is what we do in life. I've been taking people on tours also to discover the reality of life under occupation. And then I started to study at the Bethlehem Bible College to do the tour guide program. And all that time, I still had my rental house in the Netherlands where we used to spend our summers and sometimes also the Christmas holidays. But this year, I decided that it's time to give that house back to the housing association that owns it, because I think there are many families that are looking for affordable housing. And this house belongs to an association and is subsidized housing. And we have really made the decision now that our future, at least for the coming years, is in Palestine. So that means that in the last 2 weeks of August, I will have to empty my house, get rid of all my personal belongings, and I'm not going to ship anything to Palestine. So I am trying to get rid of everything and give it a new home, sell it, or just bring it to a second hand. And that's quite a lot of work. So that's why after this episode, I will take another podcast break until probably mid-September. And then I will be back with new episodes recorded in Palestine. That was something more about me, for those of you who don't know me. And then how did I get to do this podcast is because, last summer we were all coming out of the first big lockdown and we realized that it wasn't going to be over and that tourism wasn't going to come back anytime soon. And I realized that I have to shift my ideas about the coming future and what will I do with my knowledge. And in the same time, I was talking to some of our student colleagues about sharing the knowledge that we have and how nice it would be to have a platform where to share it. And then I used to voice record messages to share with my colleague students because I already had the experience in tour guiding back home in Holland. And I realized that having a lot of knowledge is one thing, but being able to put that into an interesting story is another skill. So I wanted to show them how to do that. And I said it would be nice if these recorded messages could be shared with a wider audience. I wasn't a podcast listener, and I just found out about podcasting and I started to research it and I watched a lot of tutorials and I basically I'm a self-taught podcaster, and I think most podcasters are. I never took any course and I didn't know how to go about it, just step by step. And I think if you listen back, you will hear that there is difference in audio quality with the first episodes and later episodes. And maybe also I shifted the idea that I had on how I wanted to do it. I realized that I have stories to tell, but there are so many stories that Palestinians should tell and can tell much better than I do. So then I started doing interviews and also going on excursion with some people and recording live on location. So it is still developing, and I still have a lot of plans. It's endless. We can discuss so much more history, and there is so much more to discover about Palestine. And I actually recently listened back to the first episode I recorded, which was the episode with Vivian Sansour and Zaid Hillel. And that is a beautiful story about the Abu Samra heirloom wheat. It was the first episode I recorded. It was very lively. We were sitting in our bar in Al Jisr, and we were just talking, the three of us. I included some music also in that podcast episode. And it is one of the most listened to episodes, I also have to say, so far. And I think my main aim with the podcast is to put Palestine back on the tourism map. I want people to realize how much history and how many archaeological sites, how much beauty, nature, heritage, amazing food, amazing people, music, culture, and all of that is available in Palestine. And very important that it is okay and normal and safe to visit Palestine, that you don't have to feel that you should be doing something to support. I mean, you should support the Palestinians for sure, and that's good to support them in their struggle. But Palestinians deserve tourism just as much as any other people in the world, and they live of tourism. So if you come and you spend your holiday money in Palestine, you're already doing something to support Palestinians. And not only financially, but also to show how much you appreciate their country and their hospitality and their efforts, their skilled tour guides and their hotels, their restaurants. So you will appreciate all of that, and they will be delighted and they'll be honored to have you. And that's what I want people to understand. My message is put Palestine on your bucket list. So right now, it's not possible to travel to Palestine because of the COVID pandemic, and they still didn't open for individual tourists. But you can educate yourself now. You can get into the mood, and then you are ready once the world opens up again. What I did not expect, but what I realized in the course of time, is that many of the listeners are Palestinians in the diaspora. And some of them have never been able to visit Palestine. And the stories that they hear on the podcast connect them to the land of their ancestors. And it has been heartwarming to realize this. And I receive regular messages of appreciation from Palestinians who live out of Palestine. So that is very beautiful. Let me share with you the top 10 of countries where listeners are currently from. So number 1 is the United States. Many Palestinians who live in the United States. The Netherlands, and that's logic because that's where I'm from. Israel. I have a lot of people writing me that they are Jewish Israelis listening to the podcast and learning from the podcast another narrative. And this is also very interesting. The United Kingdom is number 4. Palestine is number 5. And then Germany, Canada, Norway, France, and Australia. And there are many other countries where people are listening from. I had a total of about 80 different countries that people tuned in from. And the podcast has been growing and growing, where in the first month, I used to have maybe 40 to 50 episode downloads per month of a new episode. Now I would say that is about 350 to 400 for a new episode. And the best listened podcast episodes, let me see. Absolutely one of the favorites is the Dabka in Palestine and the Christmas episode. And also the one that I did during the attacks on Jerusalem and Gaza was actually the most listened to episode. People were really looking for news in that time. And don't forget, a growing audience is really important for a podcaster. First of all, because you feel encouraged to continue, but definitely also because the more people listen, the more people are willing to buy me a cup of coffee once in a while and to donate through the platform. So that makes the podcast more sustainable, because there are definitely costs that we make as podcasters. We have to host the podcast, that's not free, to get transcripts, to get the website hosted, recording equipment. And obviously we spend a lot of time also preparing and producing and editing the episodes. And in a time where there is no tourism, and I used to work in tourism, now this is the only source of income. So your donations are incredibly important and very much appreciated. So if you want to do a special anniversary donation to celebrate this milestone, then you can click on the link in the show notes. You go to the Ko-fi page and you can do a donation. You can follow the Ko-fi page also. Then you get notifications when I upload something new. And I always try to post some unique content, videos and photos and audio sometimes on the Ko-fi page that are only available there, not on other social media platforms, so that you as a supporter of the podcast get extra appreciation for your donation. And now I would like you to listen to a compilation of all the messages that I've received from people from all over the world who sent me their stories, reviews, messages for the first anniversary of Stories from Palestine podcast. Thank you, everyone who contributed to that.
Hi, I'm Jenny Hadad. I am a filmmaker and an olive oil entrepreneur. I am also a Palestinian American. My father migrated from Ramallah, Palestine back in 1966. So I grew up with the culture. I grew up hearing about Palestine. It has always been near and dear to me, but it wasn't until 2016 that I got to travel to Palestine for the very first time. A friend of mine put me in contact with Crystal, who helped facilitate all my travels down to where I was staying, restaurant recommendations. Her and her husband invited me to their cafe, Singer Cafe every morning for coffee. They also connected me with tour guides to the different regions and villages within the West Bank, where I got to learn about the historical background of these villages, but also the current day situation. I got to come face to face with the people. It was a very immersive and embedded experience. It was so invaluable. I'm so very grateful. And I've since been back every year until the pandemic hit. And obviously travel is prohibited and I'm unable to be there. So I was so delighted when Crystal created Stories for Palestine, because I can continue learning about the rich, rich history of Palestine and also stay up to date with what's going on right now. It's also very helpful when sharing with other people, because I'm always inclined to educate others on the current situation in Palestine. But unfortunately, when I'm doing it, I don't always have the very specific nitty-gritty dates and names, the granular details of the situation. So it could be easy just to share a podcast that can help further educate other people. So it's invaluable. I'm so excited to hear what's next, and I'm so grateful for this podcast. Thank you, Crystal.
I remember 2 years ago when we started studying together tour guiding, and one day we were like, after the first couple of weeks, I remember how much we were getting so excited about the topics and what we're studying and everything. I was with you in the car, you were driving me to Bet Sahur, and we started talking about how much we need to find a way from the start to do something with this knowledge beside, waiting for 2 years and starting tour guiding, but like do something, write articles or do videos or podcasts or something. And you said it, but you did it. As a colleague, I'm very proud. We mentioned it, we talked about it, and after a couple of months, you started it. You started the podcast, started growing, and I think, and here's where the second thing I want to say is, as a fellow colleague and a friend, and also as a new recent tour guide as well, I'm very excited. I love your podcast, and it's not just because of information, but as I mentioned to you, I consider it as one of the resources for my knowledge to keep on growing in tour guiding. And I love it. Thank you very much for your hard work, especially how you really cover not just about history and geography and archaeology, but you cover almost every idea and every aspect of Palestine, of what it is. And I think that's amazing. And I really look forward always for your episodes. As I said, I learn a lot from them. And if you and your podcast is one of the resources for me to really keep on growing in my knowledge and tour guiding.
My name is Nida. I first heard about the podcast through social media. Palestine is my homeland. My family is from Tulkarem in Jaffa, and I'm the third generation living in Diaspora. I love all the episodes, but my favorite was the 3-part series on Jaffa. In future podcasts, I'd love to hear more about Palestinian folklore.
Hello, dear Crystal. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you very much for what you are doing with your program. I would like to share my experience living in the diaspora. I am in Chile. I would like to say to you and everybody who is listening now that it is difficult to live in the diaspora because somehow you feel that you are in an interval, belonging to the country that received your family and yearning to return from where they left. And in that feeling is the feeling of not knowing where to belong. But with the help of your program, we remember that we have a home. We have identity, we have history, we have folklore. And that makes ourselves visible beyond what is shown to outsiders. It gives us a breath to feel that we still exist. You have been a great bond with my roots, and I hope one day, sweetie, I will walk down a street in Palestine and meet you to give you a big hug. And then, of course, go to it and talk about how beautiful our family is. Because this is what I think. Whoever approached to Palestine becomes family. Who understands and feels being Palestinian understood about humanity. And to it, Crystal, we all belong. And where everything is the family, regardless of where it comes from. I send you love to you, to your family, to my Palestinians, and I wish you a healthy and peaceful life.
And the Qibli Mosque, which
Crystal, hi, كيف حالك? I'm listening to the trilogy, Jerusalem to Jaffa.
These big, important buildings.
And it's very nice. I just want you to know that.
Important. He wanted to.
Hello, I'm Linda from Leeds in the UK, and I'm a big fan of Crystal's Stories from Palestine podcast. And I'm here today to congratulate her on her first year podcasting. I first heard about Crystal's podcast on the Palestine Heirloom Seeds Facebook site when she interviewed Vivian Sansour and her colleagues. My connection with Palestine is through my grandfather, Fred, who was in the Egypt-Palestine campaign in 1917-1918. And he left in our family archive some beautiful postcards and little black and white photographs of Palestine in that era of the famous sites and the landscape. My favourite podcasts are the Jaffa trilogy, not only because I love road trips, and Crystal certainly took us on a beautiful journey, a very historic journey. In fact, she took us back to the Nabka, which I also have a connection with because I was born on the day after the Nabka. I also loved the Music and Musicians podcast, the Natural History Museum, and all the ones that were recorded to do with olive trees and olive production, olive presses. I also love the one about caves because Crystal has such a passion for the caves in Palestine. I'd love to hear more podcasts to do with gardening with children, gardening in refugee camps and under difficult conditions and situations with children. I would really like to praise Crystal for her wonderful work this last year. During difficult times for her and everyone in the world, she's lifted my spirits every Monday when her new podcast has been broadcast. She's a great storyteller. Her voice has beautiful rhythm and pace and tonality, and she has great presence when she's recording and doing her podcasts. So I wish her well, and I wish her every success for the second year of Stories from Palestine podcast.
Hello, Crystal. Thank you for having me in your podcast. My name is Marcelo Marzuka. I am a Chilean Palestinian, originally from Bethlehem, currently living in Santiago de Chile, where I was born and raised. Again, thank you for these short minutes. I really like your podcast, and I really enjoy listening to the direct experiences and knowledges that you bring with your guests and through your guests about different issues about Palestine, showing its beauty, the generosity of its people, and the situation beyond what we usually see right in the news. So my family immigrated from Palestine to Chile in the mid-50s. My mother arrived being a baby, along with my grandfather, my grandmother, and some of my uncles and aunties. The initial idea was to make some work here and save some money and then go back to Palestine, as my great-grandfather did in the 1920s, actually going to Honduras. But eventually they decided to stay here in Chile and make life here. Here's where most of my cousins were born. I was born here as well. We as a family have been constantly in touch with Palestine. Almost all of us have traveled at least twice or thrice to Palestine, even though we're far, far away. And we keep in close contact with our homeland. And we participate in different organizations of the Palestinian community here in Chile. Then I learned about the podcast through you, actually. We've been friends for some years now. I remember we met, more than 10 years ago, when I was on my first visit to Palestine, when I was a university student. And I went to the Alternative Information Center in Bet Sahur, where you did an amazing job with screening films, having lectures, book presentations. And I remembered that as a great space for cultural interaction and meeting interesting people. It was a very cool place to go and hang out and learn different aspects of Palestine. And then we've been keeping in touch. I think that all the times I've been to Palestine, again, I've been able to visit. And most recently, I've been able to go to Singer Cafe and have a drink in that great place that hopefully you'll be able to open again, if you haven't already. Then about my favorite episodes of the podcast, I would say that the ones regarding the caves of the Bethlehem area and monasticism there were very interesting to listen to, because I feel that these two topics are kind of in the popular and religious culture and discourse, right? And tellings and oral history of the Bethlehem area. And they were just very interesting to learn from. I remember I listened to this like 3 times just to absorb all the information that your guests were telling. Then the ones regarding the musical instruments, right? The oud, the nai, the kanun. I am a amateur oud player myself. I was taught by one of my cousins, and he was taught by our grandfather, who played the oud and violin and kemanji. So that was very interesting to learn from. And the one regarding right to movement, the sports is, I think, not something very common or widespread in Palestine. And I think that they're doing a great job combining sports and raising attention about the mobility restrictions or movement restrictions that Palestinians face. And then the short episode you made about the flag that has very national and symbolic significance. I think that it was also very interesting and very refreshing to listen to.
Hi, I'm Rani, a Palestinian Canadian currently living in Dubai. My dad is from Nablus and my mom is from Jerusalem. I was actually first able to visit Palestine when I became Canadian, and I instantly felt at home. There is something so beautiful and familiar and comfortable about being around people that speak the words you do in the dialect that you do. Culture for me feels like home, and the closer I am to the source of that culture, the more at home I feel. So I actually stumbled upon stories from Palestine on social media, and it was the episode about cultural differences with your friend Najwan. And for me, I instantly felt connected with that episode because I just love it when people adapt and connect in foreign places and start to understand the beauty and nuances of different cultures that are not necessarily their own. I love what you're doing and I have a lot of respect for it. Your curiosity about my culture as someone living somewhere else and not in Palestine keeps me so intrigued and engaged in your podcasts. And I love to always hear the stories of, my homeland and my country through the eyes of someone that's living there but not necessarily from there. So I look forward to seeing what new episodes you have coming up.
Hi, Crystal. It was so nice to finally meet you in your hometown, Utrecht, here in Holland. And whenever we're talking, I'm always reminded by how we got to know each other. And for me, visiting Palestine, first of all, it was my very first time in Palestine, and I decided to travel by myself to go on a solo trip. A lot of the people that I told that I was going to Palestine thought I was crazy, especially to choose Palestine as a destination for a solo trip. But for me, when I look back at my visit, I can really say that the taxi drivers, the service drivers that I met there really made all the difference in the world. So it began upon arrival when I landed in the middle of the night and I was supposed to go to a guest house in Bethlehem. And when I landed in Tel Aviv, I had nobody that was waiting for me at the airport. And I just thought, God, please help me to speak to the right person that can somehow help me. And I just saw this taxi driver standing in the hall. And I just walked up to him and asked him how I could get to the buses that were supposed to take me to Bethlehem. So he looked at me and he was a little bit worried. And he said, there's no way that you're going to get to Bethlehem today because there's no buses that are going there. In the end, this person that I just randomly approached, this taxi driver, ended up being your husband's cousin. And he ended up being from the neighborhood. So he knew Bethlehem very well. He even knew the guest house where I was supposed to be going. And he even knew the owners. And he drove me there. And as we were driving there, he asked me a little bit about myself. So I told him that I was from Holland, and he immediately told me, write this number down. You need to go to the cafe. You need to talk to Crystal because she's from Holland as well. And you need to tell her the whole story and she will show you around. So that's how we got to know each other. And then the other event is when I was traveling from Bethlehem to Jerusalem and I was in another taxi. And after the taxi driver had dropped me off at the bus stop, he asked me if I had enough money for the bus. So I emptied my wallet and turned out that I didn't have enough money. So what this taxi driver did is he actually gave me money so that I would have enough to pay for the bus from away to Jerusalem, which was such an amazing thing for him to do. And this is just somebody that had randomly picked me up, And then the final story is another taxi driver that was on my final night in Palestine. We got to talking in his car as he was driving me back to the location. And then he invited me to have a cup of tea at his house. I thought, you know what, why not? So I went home with him and with his son. It sounds really random now, but at that time it was fine. And we ended up having the most delicious final meal that I had in Palestine with him and his family. And all the children were there, and we ended up talking the entire night. That was the perfect way to end the trip. So for me, these three men really made the difference. And I cannot wait to come back to Palestine. And I hope I'll see you soon.
Stories from Palestine. What a lovely podcast and what a lovely work you're doing, Chris. Especially it is about documenting the Palestinian life and the Palestinian culture and talking about different subject in Palestine and sharing minds from Palestinians from different areas in life and different walk. It's such a lovely and important, a crucial step. I feel we are as a Palestinian, it's a big duty on us to document our culture and everything happening with us in Palestine due to the occupation and the oppression, and how they're trying to put our voice down, and how they are trying to direct it to a certain narrative. And for any story and even any small thing that we can share from Palestine to the world, I feel it is very important work, and it play a big role to encounter all the mainstream media and what they are talking about the Palestinian and what's happening in Palestine. I really appreciate your work, and I'm so happy to be part of this. And I look forward to hear more episodes about more interesting subject from all walk of life in Palestine. Bless your work and bless the station.
I came across Crystal's podcast by accident because we are both part of the same Facebook group, She Podcasts, and she had commented on some question, and I saw the word Palestine, and I was like really intrigued to know who is this woman that has a podcast about Palestine, because I'm very much interested in Palestine. So I started following her and I started listening to her podcasts, and there was one very special episode that was the Easter episode, because Easter for me is very special, and due to COVID, we were at home, we couldn't be with family. And I started listening to her podcast, and it was a very special episode for me and my partner. We really felt like, okay, we had a very nice Easter celebration, let's say, listening to the sounds of Easter and hearing the stories and what the students from the Bible College and Crystal had to share was very beautiful and very special for us. So this has been my favorite podcast episode. And since I started following Crystal, I was like, I really want to interview her for my own podcast. So one day I messaged her and I asked her if she wanted to speak on my show, which she agreed on. And we recorded a very beautiful and important podcast episode about the situation in Palestine. We spoke about occupation, settlements, about the forced displacement of people from their homes. And she shared her daily reality. We spoke about Mahmoud Darwish, Marcelo Khalifa. And yes, it was lovely to have Crystal on my podcast. And I got so many positive responses from people who had no idea about the reality on the ground. And people telling me, I actually want to visit Palestine now. I didn't know that it's possible. And I was really surprised about those comments, actually. And also a friend of mine who was looking for a location to improve her Arabic told me that after listening to Crystal, I consider going to Palestine instead of another country that she had in mind. And about Crystal, I love her aura. I mean, I love your aura, Crystal. You have so much knowledge to share. You have so much wisdom. You know so many things. It's beautiful listening to you, listening to your voice, listening to your stories and your smile and everything you bring out there is just wonderful. So congratulations on 1 year with Stories from Palestine. And I'm looking forward to listening to more of your stories. I love how you combine history with nature, with politics, with so many beautiful things, music, yoga, everything is in your podcast. And I'm hoping to be able to visit Palestine in the future with my family and to spend time with you there. So lots of love from me, Stella.
And Stella has a very nice podcast herself. It's called Salt the Podcast. In Salt the Podcast, she has open and honest and bold conversations with women from all spheres of life. And you can listen to some courageous, outspoken and wise women. It's an inspiring podcast available on all podcast players. Salt the Podcast. I had 2 more messages that I received by email, and I will read them for you. The first one is from Lokien. She is a Dutch friend of mine, and she wrote me this. When I came to Palestine for the first time, counting back 17 years ago, it immediately hit me. There were times I regretted falling in love with this country specifically, as it was such a hassle to enter the country, especially in that time. Why does a country appeal to you? I wondered sometimes. Of course, it's not the military occupation, the checkpoints, the violence and the grief, but between all this mayhem, there is something special, something shiny. I sometimes say Palestinians live in two layers. On one hand, there is the daily reality of the occupation. On the other hand, people also simply wake up, take breakfast, and what kind of breakfast, by the way, it's delicious, go to their work or school, visit family, celebrate a party. Sometimes a day feels like a normal life, until someone comes home from her work in hospital telling that she couldn't save a baby because the mother was held at the checkpoint for hours and the detour she had to make became fatal to her child. At once you're thrown back in the other layer. Furthermore, the country is beautiful and interesting. Imagine the oldest continuously inhabited city of the world, to name just one thing. The food is delicious, also for vegetarians. And there's always this hard-to-describe feeling of friendliness, hospitality, readiness to help. Arriving at the West Bank and leaving out the checkpoints and surveying Israeli soldiers, I don't feel more safe anywhere else in the world than here. Knowing that when you get lost, loads of people will help you out. Knowing that when you're invited for coffee, you are really only invited for coffee and the accompanying delicacies, and no hidden agendas. A nice anecdote. Once I bought some credit for my phone, but I didn't manage to get it working. I asked a group of young guys if they could help. They grabbed my phone out of my hands and ran away. Normally, I would start to panic, but here I found myself a place to sit and waited. After a while, they came back and my phone worked. I thanked them friendly and continued my way. I don't consider myself an expert in any way, but I have visited the country several times and I didn't expect to learn much new about it from a podcast. Nevertheless, I decided to listen one of the episodes of Stories from Palestine, maybe rather out of courtesy or out of curiosity. How wrong could I be? After a few episodes, I bought myself wireless headphones so I could be the first one to listen to a new episode. It's amazing how every episode is unique, interesting, surprising, and brings you the spirit and feeling of Palestine right in your living room or kitchen, depending where you listen. I became more amazed with the country, the people, and the options in the area every week. I cannot wait to visit again. Sadly, it was not possible this year due to COVID. Luckily, I do get some taste of it through the personal stories in the podcasts. I get devastated by the bad news that keeps coming, and I keep being amazed by the resilience of the Palestinians. I truly wish I will once visit a free Palestine. And we will finish with a message I received from Bisan, who had wanted to record a message, but she was in a hectic move between apartments in New York City, so she sent me a written message on Instagram. She says, "My name is Bisan and I am a Palestinian currently living in New York City. I came across Stories from Palestine through social media, and since the moment I listened to it, I have been eagerly anticipating each episode. Not only is it another way for me to feel closer to my homeland, it has also given me a great deal of new and interesting information that I didn't know of. Crystal's really incredible at narrating stories from our beautiful land, and I love the selection of topics. My favorite episodes are the ones on Debka, Olive Harvest, and the names of Jerusalem. And I have shared them with many of my non-Palestinian friends to learn more about the Palestinian heritage and history. I also love how Crystal manages to interview really interesting people doing vital work for the Palestinian community, so I would love to hear more stories as such in future episodes from Palestinians all over historic Palestine and the diaspora. Thank you, Crystal, for the immense effort that you put into producing this podcast. It's been my tune-in on Mondays over the past few months, and I'm looking forward to listening to more stories from my beloved homeland. And thank you, Bisan, and all the others for taking time to send audio recordings and messages. It means the world to me to know that all the efforts are appreciated and that we all share this love and passion for a special place in the world. I also want to thank Zaid Hillel, musician from Beit Sahur, who composed the jingle and the shifters for Stories from Palestine, and he made a special tune for this celebration episode. You can find Zaid's music on Spotify, YouTube and SoundCloud, and he has some really good songs that you will enjoy, so check him out. I will include the link to his music channels in the show notes. So this is the last episode in the summer series, and I'm going to have a break until mid-September. Until that time, you can listen back to episodes that you haven't heard yet. You can also follow the podcast on social media and on YouTube. And if you sign up for the email list, you will never miss an episode because I send weekly reminders, and in the future I will start sending more information on tours and programs that I am hoping to organize. And of course, if you want to do an anniversary gift to the podcast to help me continue creating new content and cover the costs of the podcast, because there are costs involved, then this week is your chance to send a donation through the Ko-fi platform. You can find the link in the show notes. Thanks again. Shukran. Yatikum al-afia. Bless you all.